Welcome to the conflicts episode of the version control with Git series. In this episode, we'll pick up where we left off learning about branches, and we'll be actually learning how to resolve conflicts where we've made changes to the same line of the same file in two different branches. This could be an example of where you're working in parallel and you didn't realize you'd made changes to the same file, and so when you tried to merge those back together, you got a conflict and you had to fix it. It could be maybe your collaborator's working on one branch and you're working on another branch and you tried to merge those together and got a conflict. And so here we're going to learn how to resolve conflicts in Git specifically. So let's see where we are in our repository. So we can type pwd and we see that we're in the planets folder. We have a number of files, two of which are version controlled, mars.txt and analysis.py. If we cat mars.txt to the screen, we should see it has 3 lines so far. And then if we type git log --1 line, we should see we have 5 commits so far. So in this example, we're going to both add a 4th line to this mars.txt file. We'll add 1 line in the main branch and 1 line in a branch called Mars temp, because it's going to be a line about the temperature on Mars. And so to make Mars temp not have only have the same commits as main has so far, we'll make Mars temp right now. We'll type git branch Mars temp. Now if we type git branch, we see we have 2 branches, main and Mars temp. If we type git log --1 line, we should see that so far main and Mars temp have all 5 of these commits. So next we need to make changes to the Mars text file in both the main and Mars temp branches. And so while we're still in the main branch, let's make a change to mars.txt. We'll say nano mars.txt. And then we'll add a 4th line here. And that 4th line will be, I'll be able to get 40 extra minutes of beauty rest. The days are longer on Mars, so Dracula gets to sleep a little bit more. And so we'll save this new line that we're adding as the 4th line, Control X. Yes, we would like to save our changes and we want to keep the same file name. If we cat mars.txt to the screen, we should see now that we have a 4th line here. We haven't added and committed it yet though, but let's type git status. That tells us that we've modified mars.txt, but we haven't added and committed it yet. And we are on the main branch, which is where we want to commit this change. So we'll type git add. Actually, here I'm going to show you how to make a commit in one step. Earlier in the series, I told you with commits that we always have to add the file we want to commit first, and then we can commit it to the repository and give it our message. There is an exception to that rule, and that exception is if it's a file that's already been edited before, which is true for mars.txt, and if we're only committing one file. So if we wanted to commit more than one file, we couldn't do this one-step add and commit. So we'll type git commit -m. And then we'll type our message, which is add a line about daylight on Mars. And then after it, we need to give it the name of the file, mars.txt. And see, this only works on a single file. And so I press enter, and it let me add and commit in a single line. Again, this only works with one file at a time, and it only works if we've previously committed mars.txt, or the file we want to commit. Otherwise, it'll give us an error. All right, so we're still in the main branch, but we've added and committed this new line. Now let's switch over to the Mars temp branch and add a different line there. So we'll type git checkout Mars temp Let's look at that different version of git log we learned in the last episode that will show us a little bit more about how the branches relate to one another. So we'll type git log -- one line -- all for all branches -- decorate -- graph. And so this gives us a version, actually the current version, it looks pretty similar, but as we add more commits, it will continue to look a little bit more different. Right now it's showing us that Mars temp has the first 5 commits and main has that new line about daylight on Mars. And we are currently on the Mars temp branch, which we can see because our head is pointing at Mars temp. And so let's modify mars.text. So we need to type nano mars.text. And you can see it doesn't have that 4th line because I remember that's only in the main branch, and we made our Mars temp branch before we made that change. And so here we're going to add a line about the temp on Mars. So we'll say Yeti will appreciate the cold. And we're going to save and exit. So Control X. Yes, I would like to save my changes and I want to keep the file name the same. So enter. All right, so now if I cat mars.text to the screen, I should see that I have Yeti will appreciate the cold as the last line here. I'm actually missing my blank line after there. I'll leave it, and I think it'll be okay for our conflict. We'll see what happens if not. And then we need to add and commit this change to the Mars temp branch. So we'll say git add mars.text. Git commit. And again, I'm doing it in 2 steps because that's generally more common. I could do this one in 1 step because I've previously committed mars.text and I only changed 1 file. And I'll say add line about temp on Mars. All right, let's look at our git log again now. So I'm going to hit the up arrow until I get back that git log 1 line command again. So now I can see that my branches differ on their last commits. They have all the same history until that last commit where main has a line about the daylight and Mars temp has a line about the temperature. Now I'm going to merge these 2 branches together and I'll get an error because I edited the same line of the same file and the computer won't be sure how to solve that problem. It doesn't know which one it should keep and which one it should not keep or which one's right. And so it's going to give us what's called a conflict. We can merge main into Mars temp, but it's a little bit more common that as you're working on branches, you'll probably be merging them into the main branch. And so let's go back to the main branch and merge it into Mars temp. And so to get back to the main branch, we'll type git checkout main. And then now that we're here, we can type git merge Mars temp. And you can see here where last time it said fast forwarding and it merged in the branches seamlessly because we had added a separate file. This time it's giving us a conflict. It said merge conflict in mars.text. So we both edited the same line of the mars.text file and the automatic merge failed. It tells us we need to fix the conflicts and then commit the result. Let's look at what git status, before we fix the conflict, let's look at what git status shows us. So if we type git status, we can see it tells us a new message. It says we both modified mars.text. And so that tells us that we have, and it says it's an unmerged path. So that's a way of it's telling us that we have a conflict in mars.text that we need to fix. All right, so we'll type nano mars.text to take a look at our conflict. And so what we can see here is that it's added this some greater than signs and head and an equal sign line and a greater than signs and Mars. I guess these are less than signs. And mars.temp or Mars temp. And so what it's telling us here is that they had the same first 3 lines, but then in the 4th line, this one had I'll be able to get an extra 40 minutes of beauty rest and a blank line, and that was in the head, so that's in the main branch. And then this one separates the difference between the 2 branches. And then this one says the Mars temp branch had Yeti will appreciate the cold. And so it's showing us what the different lines were here. And this could be that you have a conflict in multiple places in your file if you've edited multiple different lines and they're conflicting. And so you might have more than one of these conflicts sections where it's marked up the conflict in your file. And you want to go ahead and make sure you find all of them and correct all of those conflicts before you commit and go on. And so it's up to us to solve the conflict because we can understand what should happen here where the computer can't. And so we're going to go in and make the file what it should be, however the file should be. It could be keeping one section and not the other. It could be keeping the other section and not the original one. It could be deleting both of them and writing some new code or some new lines to actually fix the problem. In our case, we're going to actually keep both lines. So I'll be able to get 40 minutes of beauty rest, and we'll keep Yeti will appreciate the cold, and we will get rid of all of the extra text it put in to show us where the conflict was. And so we should now have a blank line at the end. That's the way I want it. And I'm gonna go ahead and exit. So I'm gonna hit Control X. Yes, I want to save it. Enter, I keep the same name. And then I'll type cat.mars.txt. And so again, I solved the conflict by removing all of the lines that showed where the conflict was. And then I decided to keep both of the lines. It looks like I am still not having the blank line at the end, but it doesn't really matter. We can leave it that way. Let's see what it says now if we type git status. Still gives us the same both modified mars.txt line. And so now we need to add and commit this fixed conflict to our repository so that it has the record of the resolution of this conflict. So we'll type git add mars.txt, git commit -m, and we'll say fixed conflict. And so let's take a look at our branches now that we've fixed the conflict and our history. So we'll hit the up arrow until we get back to that nice git log command we had with one line, all decorate graph. And so here we can see the history of these branches again. So they all have the first few commits, and then there's a branch that comes off of it, and Mars temp has a line about the temp on Mars, but it doesn't have a line about the daylight on Mars, and main has everything, and it has this fixed conflict commit as well. And so we can clean up our branches before we finish our conflict and get rid of that Mars temp branch. We could also update it by merging main into Mars temp, and then it will actually merge in the fixed conflict because it knows how the conflict was resolved. But we'll go ahead and delete the Mars temp branch with git branch -d Mars temp. And now we've fixed our conflict, and if we hit git log again, we should see that we have the history of the fact that there were two branches and they conflicted, but then we brought them back together and fixed the conflict in this next commit. All right, and so as you work with branches, there's an occasion where you might run into conflicts, but it's not something to avoid. Conflicts are okay. We can go in and fix them and make them what they should be and add and commit them, and then we'll be able to go forward with our Git repository and the history of this particular repository. This is the end of the conflicts lesson of the series on version control with Git. In the next episode, we'll start talking about how to use GitHub. Everything we've done so far in this workshop has been on our local computer, and GitHub allows us to share repositories on the web, and we can use that as a point to sync between different computers. We can use it to publish software to the web so that we can collaborate with people, or we can have it up so that other people can use it after we've published our analysis. And so in the next episode, we'll start to learn a little bit more about how to use GitHub, the service that hosts Git repositories.